Heidi. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Heidi who lived with her aunt. One day, the little girl travelled with her aunt to her grandpa's little hut in the mountains. It was the first time that Heidi had met her Grandpa Alm, and she thought he was a very grumpy old man. Heidi's aunt told the little girl that she'd found a new job in the city and could not take Heidi along with her. The little girl would now be living with Grandpa Alm in his little mountain hut. Grandpa Alm had been living alone for many years. He was actually quite glad to have Heidi's company, but found it very hard to show her how he felt. However, he'd made the little home cosy and welcoming, and the little girl loved her grandpa right from the start. When Heidi woke up after her first night in the hut, she met her grandpa's dog, Joseph. Joseph was a big and very loving dog who immediately became Heidi's playmate. He would go everywhere with Heidi. One day when she was out walking in the hills with Joseph, she met a shepherd boy called Peter. He was watching his herd of goats. Peter, recognizing that Heidi's face was not a familiar one, called out to her, "Hey, hi, are you new around here? I haven't seen you before." "Yes," replied Heidi, excited to see another young person. "I've just moved here to live with my grandpa." Peter began to take Heidi along with him when he took his goats out to graze. The two became firm friends and would walk together in the mountains. Everything in the countryside was new and exciting for Heidi. She loved to hear tales from Peter and learned a lot from him about how to be a shepherd. Heidi's grandpa also loved her very much, although he didn't really show it. Heidi was also very happy with her new life in the mountains. She would run around in the fresh air every day, playing in the open fields. She was also a kind and caring little girl, and she helped her grandpa with the chores as much as she could. She loved to bake bread and would take freshly baked bread over to Peter's grandmother every day. In return, Peter's grandmother would send fresh goat milk for Heidi and Grandpa Alm to drink. Heidi and Peter spent time together all summer long. Soon, however, autumn arrived, and it was time for Peter to go back to school. Heidi grew bored and missed her friend. She wished that she were old enough to go to school like Peter. One day, Heidi's aunt appeared and decided to take Heidi back to the city. She said that Heidi would be able to be homeschooled at the big house where her aunt was working. Grandpa Alm was disappointed. He'd grown so fond of Heidi and enjoyed her company very much. At first, he told Heidi's aunt to leave the little girl in the mountains with him where she was happy. But the more he thought about it, the more he decided that Heidi would be better off in the city, where she could learn to read and write and create a future for herself. Heidi was upset. She didn't want to leave Grandpa Alm or their cosy little mountain hut. She didn't want to leave her new friend Peter either. "Grandpa," she cried, "I don't want to leave. Please let me stay here with you." Eventually, Heidi left with her aunt, with the promise that after a short while in the city, she would be able to return to the mountains and visit Grandpa Alm. Heidi and her aunt had a long train journey to the city. When they finally arrived at the big house where the girl's aunt worked, Heidi's eyes opened wide in surprise. "Wow!" she exclaimed. "What a big house! Will I really be living here? I think I'm going to be very happy." Heidi soon met Clara, the girl who lived in the house. Clara had had an accident when she was little, which meant that she couldn't walk and had to use a wheelchair. Heidi's aunt had actually brought her to the house, thinking that she could be a playmate for Clara to keep her company. The two girls came from very different backgrounds. Heidi knew very little about life in the city and often made Clara giggle with her little mistakes. Despite their differences, the girls were soon the very best of friends. Clara's grandmother, however, was very strict. She would shout at Heidi and make her study hard. Clara's grandmother was trying to teach Heidi how to behave in the city and in a big house. She taught her how to sit up properly and how to use a knife and fork at the dinner table. She even dressed Heidi in smart clothes like the other children in the big city. Heidi didn't feel comfortable with all of these changes and longed for the simple life in the mountains with Grandpa Alm. She loved being with Clara, but she missed Peter and her grandpa a lot. Heidi's sadness grew. Soon the little girl even stopped eating because her sadness was too great. Clara's father and grandmother felt very sorry for Heidi and decided that the best thing that they could do was to let the little girl go back to her grandpa. Clara was upset at the thought of losing her good friend, but soon realised that it was the best thing for Heidi. When it was time to say goodbye, Heidi's aunt told her that Clara would come to the mountains and visit her when she was able. Heidi was thrilled to be back in the mountains. The first thing that she did was to visit Peter's grandmother and take her some bread that Clara's grandmother had sent from the city. Then she ran to her grandpa's hut as quickly as she could and gave him the biggest hug. Heidi easily settled back down to her life in the mountains and was excited one day to receive a letter that said that Clara would soon be visiting. She could not wait to have her friend with her again and introduce her to Peter. How she looked forward to having her two best friends together. The mountain air worked wonders for Clara's health. She was having a wonderful time with Heidi and thought very fondly of Peter too. Peter, however, began to grow jealous of Clara. He thought that Heidi would once again go back to the city to be with her friend, leaving him alone. Peter also got tired of having to carry Clara to her wheelchair and push her around. One day, in his anger, Peter pushed Clara's wheelchair off a cliff, thinking that this would make him feel better and solve all of the problems. He didn't realise, though, that Heidi was determined to help her friend as much as possible. Without the wheelchair, and with the help of the clean mountain air, Clara had got a lot stronger. With Heidi's help, she began to take her first steps. After a while, she was even able to take some steps by herself. "I can walk!" she cried excitedly. "I can walk! Oh, Heidi, I couldn't have done this without your help. Thank you so much." Clara's father and grandmother wrote that they would soon come to visit. Heidi and Clara were so excited at the thought of showing them that Clara was able to walk. When they arrived and saw Clara taking steps, they could not believe their eyes and began to cry with happiness. They hugged and kissed Clara, and they also gave thanks to Heidi and Grandpa Alm for all of their care, help and support. By now, Peter was also feeling extremely guilty about pushing Clara's wheelchair off the cliff. He apologised and explained to everybody that he'd done it because he'd been jealous of Clara, but that now he realised what a stupid and dangerous thing it had been, and that he was truly sorry. Everybody could see how sorry Peter was, and they soon forgave him for his actions. They knew that he would never do such a thing again. Everybody hugged each other with joy, and Clara and her family promised that they would return again next summer.